Look, I know you have read the title for this video. I know you are likely here in the comments already making remarks akin to, "This guy dares to sully the name of the great Resident Evil 4? Or, Resident Evil 4 doesn't want you to play it anyway. Or, you are not worthy, boy." Etc., etc., etc.
I'm fully aware of what I'm doing.
Resident Evil 4 is often ranked as not only the best Resident Evil game, but also one of the best video games of all time. Saying anything otherwise is usually just asking for the internet to berate you for your clearly wrong opinion. But here's the thing. I have enjoyed playing through Resident Evil 4. Just, I have not enjoyed it as much as people expected me to. I respect Resident Evil 4, but I was promised the greatest gaming experience of all time and came to the game much later than most after numerous other gaming experiences and found it was just okay. And then I continue to see review after review of people online, many who I respect and admire for their content and opinions, praising this game as some second coming of gaming, and that continued to irk me. I just wanted to see more nuance than everyone agreeing this game is a masterpiece, because I know I am not the only one who doesn't think so. I literally am starting this channel in part because the almost undisputed consensus that this game is literal perfection has annoyed me ever since I first played the game. Rather than trying to change your opinion, what I will be arguing is why many objective facts about this game simply do not work for me as effective video game storytelling. You may look at some of my arguments and say, but that's exactly why I do love the game. And that's okay. But I hope that my story with Resident Evil 4 here today will at least make you understand my point of view. Oh, who am I kidding? I am about to criticize Resident Evil 4 on the internet. I am going to be tied to a spit and roasted so hard. I guess that's what you get when you start a channel because of spite. My name is Mitch, and this is my story with Resident Evil 4. A long time ago, I watched a fantastic documentary on the creation and success of Star Wars. I'll never forget something journalist Bill Moyer said about its gigantic success. Timing is everything in art. You bring out Star Wars too early, and it's Buck Rogers. You bring it out too late, and it doesn't fit our imagination. You bring it out just as the war in Vietnam is ending, when America feels uncertain of itself, and the old stories have died. And you bring it out at that time, and suddenly, it's a new game. Context is everything, and so here is how I finally played Resident Evil 4. Though the game came out in 2005, when I was in elementary school, it wasn't until the pandemic hit that a review from one of my favorite creators encouraged me to play the Resident Evil 2 remake that I finally did. And I loved it. After that, the rest is history. I became obsessed with Resident Evil and have binged so many of the games. Here's the thing. RE4 is tied for last with Code Veronica for me. Yes, out of all the Resident Evil games I have just mentioned, I have enjoyed all of them, except Code Veronica, more than Resident Evil 4. Hopefully I will explain specifically why I have some of the more unpopular opinions I just said here. Remember I said timing is everything in art? Well, guys, RE4 may have been absolutely revolutionary in 2005, a fact I will not dispute, but I was 7 and barely played any video games at that point in my life. So, I have no nostalgia for the game. Guys, it's also no longer 2005. It's 2022. There have been better third-person, over-the-shoulder action games in the 17 years since. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's review the consensus behind Resident Evil 4. Here are the basics of Resident Evil 4, as well as facts about the game and its various elements that we can more or less agree are true about the game. Rather than continue the story about the corrupt Umbrella Corporation, the game opens by saying that the fallout of the Raccoon City outbreak caused the public to lose faith in Umbrella, causing their stock to fall to nothing, forcing them to close their doors. I'm honestly disappointed in this unceremonious ending for these great antagonists, but that's not the point of this game. Now, let's fly through a recap of the story. The game's story is about how Leon Kennedy, 6 years later, has become part of the United States Secret Service and is tasked with tracking down the US president's missing daughter in rural Spain. He travels to a village she has supposedly been spotted near and asks the locals to help find her. Turns out they are part of the cult involved in her kidnapping and try to kill Leon. Just another day at the office. Eventually, he is captured and injected with a mind control virus that the cult uses on the locals to control them. Leon then escapes and finds where they are keeping Ashley Graham, the president's daughter, where Sadler, the cult leader, explains that both of them are infected with the virus and will soon succumb to its mind control effects. Soon. So Leon and Ashley are trying to stay alive, find a cure, and escape the cult to go back home without the virus in their system so the cult can't use them to take over the United States. Along the way, they encounter the villagers and their leader, Ramon Salazar, the occupant of the nearby castle, and his cult followers, and Sadler, who uses the industrial military complex on a nearby island to turn his cult members into an army. The virus has spread to local wildlife, and the cult has also created mutated monstrous creatures to use for their own gain as they seek power. Additionally, they encounter the researcher Luis Serra, who is trying to help them find a cure and take the virus sample to a shady organization in order to prevent his research from harming more people. The plot is decidedly simple, but that's not a bad thing. There is nothing wrong with a straightforward plot with clear character and player motivations. In fact, often they are the basis for strong video game narratives. In execution, the general consensus tends to be that this plot is decidedly cheesy and over-hammy, with lots of goofy quips from the dreamboat Leon Kennedy, who is characterized as a confident veteran of biohazardous outbreaks, and is basically a superhero at this point, different from the more grounded rookie cop of RE2. Ashley is frequently seen as the annoying damsel in distress, who is constantly screaming for to come and save her, is kind of dumb and ditzy, and in the end, even makes a pass at Leon that fails to impress him. Ada is well liked as the tantalizingly sexy double agent who is ultimately on your side, and Luis Serra is a great campy and cheesy scene partner with Leon. Less so with Ashley. The villains are all mustache-twirling levels of eccentric insanity, often breaking the fourth wall in deliberately campy and cheesy dialogue that makes them fun to fight but difficult to take seriously. Guys, I hate Ramon Salazar. He's so dumb and way more annoying than Ashley. Gameplay and graphics are considered boundary pushing for the series and revolutionary for the medium of video games as a whole. This game has good graphics, but good graphics are different from good art direction. There is way too much brown in RE4. Muddy brown, dirt, rough gray, etc. An example of the dirty grime that permeated so much of early HD gaming that I hope we will leave mostly in the past. Although the art direction in terms of colors may be kinda boring to look at, you'd be hard-pressed to argue against the impressive motion capture and handcrafted facial animations. I would argue, however, that these great production values and solid voice cast is mostly wasted on a game whose plot and dialogue can't decide whether it's a good horror thriller or a dumb fun action quip fest. The game dramatically diverges from the series' traditional fixed cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, tank controls, search action exploration, and inventory management gameplay in more ways than one. What many may not know is Code Veronica is the first RE game to have real-time rendering, and therefore a dynamic camera. So RE4 is not the pioneer for the franchise in that regard. Additionally, even though the new and revolutionary over-the-shoulder camera is here, RE4 continues to have tank controls, so it did not move away from that control system. But the key differences come from the previous games' exploration, puzzle solving, resource management, and combat. Let's start with the combat, as it is easily the most praised aspect of RE4. In the older games, because of the fixed camera, when the player hits the aim button, they will automatically lock onto a target. You could aim downwards and time a shot to cripple enemies by destroying their legs, or do the same aiming upwards with a shotgun for a satisfying headshot, ultimately destroying the skull and incapacitating a zombie. You can also aim away from a locked-on target, but 9 times out of 10 it's just better to let the aim button lock onto the nearest enemy for you. Therefore, aiming is an oversight in the games, and combat becomes more of a resource management skill of determining whether it is worth it to expend ammo to permanently take out an enemy, or maneuver around them to save it for a boss fight or another enemy. This can be applied to using the knife as well, as the game will lock onto enemies for you, but you can still aim upwards towards the head, down towards the legs, or manually aim side to side. Unless you get really good at this, the knife in the older RE games is not super useful. Shout out to the madman who do knife-only runs of classic RE games. You guys are insane and mighty impressive. RE4 has a dramatically different combat system, being the pioneer of the over-the-shoulder camera third-person shooter. Aim zooms in the camera to better allow the player to aim specifically where they want to fire their bullets or slash their knife, making aiming just as critical to the combat as managing the limited ammo you pick up in the game. Due to this aiming system and the realistic reactions the enemies make to damage on certain parts of their body, the knife is way more useful here than in the older games. Slash the kneecaps enough, and the enemy will stagger, setting up a melee finisher for Leon to deliver WWE style.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Similarly, a bullet to the knees, the arms, the body, and non-lethal headshots will make the enemy recoil, stagger, or become stunned in some other way, and can also set up either a good knife slashing or a wrestling finishing move. The various weapons continue to do different types of damage the same way they did in the older RE games, but there are more weapons unseen in prior games, and the knife and melee finishers ease the burden of ammo resource management in the combat. Additionally, skill in aiming and firing your firearms can make the old ammo conservation much easier by making better use of that ammo. In every non-fixed camera RE game that has come after RE4, the combat, whether over-the-shoulder third-person or first-person, is very similar to this. And I enjoy this combat system in general, but I will get to my gripes with it here in this game. Lastly, let's talk about the exploration of old RE games that got dramatically changed here in RE4. There are three main pillars of this exploration-based gameplay. 1. Zigzag back and forth through creepy environments. 2. Find and solve puzzles and unlock new paths and areas while 3. Conserving limited resources with limited inventory space. In the older games, you would start with a small area to explore some creepy environment that has multiple locked doors with little to determine which is the correct door to unlock. You will explore said area to find cryptic puzzles requiring various items to solve them, or keys to unlock doors to expand that area, until you find the exit to the next major area. Rinse and repeat this process a couple of times, and you have a classic RE and classic survival horror game. Think how you explore the Spencer Mansion in RE1 until you find a way out the back to the secondary residence on the Spencer estate. Go down its secret passage to an underground lab, go back to the mansion to further explore until you find a way underground to the catacombs until you find Umbrella's secret, illegal, biological weapons lab. Once you find a way to escape the lab, you come up to a helicopter port and flag down the patrolling STARS helicopter to escape the mansion and the zombie-infested raccoon forest back to safety, ending the game. Finally, here is how the classic limited resource and inventory management worked. In every classic RE game, the player would have a finite number of slots to store items to carry throughout the space. This number would be anywhere from 6 to about 18 slots, depending on the game, and only some of the games would give you the opportunity to upgrade the player's inventory, making this pretty strict on the number of items the player could carry at any one time. Throughout the games, there would be rooms that act as temporary safe havens from the monsters of the game that contain a save point and/or an item box. The item box could store a dramatically increased number of items than what the player could carry. Additionally, most RE games have this item box magically connected to every other item box in the game, allowing the player to drop off an item in one room and retrieve it in another. You can also save in most of these rooms, but almost always the player would need an item called an ink ribbon to use the typewriter or save point. Essentially, the ability to save was connected to the finite number of items that allows you to use a save point, meaning saving was also a finite resource. As a result of this, the game became an optimization task of weaving back and forth between save rooms to deposit and retrieve needed items and resources. Need to go back through an area to use a key to unlock a door, but you know it's filled with zombies? Deposit the key, retrieve ammo to kill all zombies, and pick up the key at a save room closer to where you need to use it. Don't want to waste ammo on this task? How about taking a healing item or two to attempt to juke past all the enemies in between? Either way, maybe you don't need to deposit the key, and can take less ammo or healing items to make sure you can survive, but not waste a second save room stop later to retrieve your key. This resource management, with severely limited inventory space, creates fascinating cerebral gameplay that complements the zigzag exploration across a dangerous and creepy environment and back again, and additionally creates tension that makes leaving save room such a rush of horror, encouraging you to press through the danger to the other side and escape the nightmare. You are expected to think and prepare to face the enemies you already know are in your way, because by zigzagging across the map, you learn what enemies are in your way. Deciding whether to take them out or dodge them, or take routes around them when you need to cross the environment again, becomes a part of the strategy. Additionally, if you die, you will have to reload a prior save to try again. So even saving your progress becomes a source of tension in these games. Hence why the original Resident Evil is considered the pioneer and popularizer of the survival horror genre. Now take all of that exploration, crisscrossing through creepy environments, using limited inventory space to juggle weapons, ammo, healing items, and key puzzle items, and do a suplex to it directly into the ground and hammer toss it directly into space, because Resident Evil 4 has almost none of that. The environments may sometimes be creepy, but there is very little crisscrossing in this game. You may have to go one way and come back after retrieving a needed item, but it is almost entirely linear, and you will never need to go back that way ever again. The only time you need to decide to deliberately backtrack is to grab optional items like treasure, money, and consumables. But you can turn your brain off and still get through almost the entire game because it funnels you down linear corridors for 90% of it. True survival horror games know that obscuring the order of grabbing items in more open-ended areas allows them to build tension over the repeated zigzagging across large interconnected environments. Given the game's almost entirely linear level design also means that they couldn't expect the player to know what enemies they will face. So they designed combat encounters around a continual cycle of, surprise, here's a dozen enemies to kill now, for often no reason, eliminating the strategy of planning ahead. Puzzles exist, but the items needed to solve them are either in the immediate vicinity, or they are incredibly simple that upon first encountering the puzzle, you can solve it on the spot. Any key items for those puzzles also have a dedicated inventory space all their own that never fills up. Weapons, ammo, and heals also are stored in an exponentially expanded inventory, eliminating that tension of managing items in your inventory. And you will rarely need to worry about it filling up, because the enemies frequently drop these items, the game litters the environments with them, and you can buy all of them without limit from the merchant. What are you buying? Everything! Add on top of that another separate and unlimited inventory dedicated solely to money you pick up and treasure you can sell to the merchant for tons of cash, and you will never need to make hard decisions about what to keep or take with you, because you can practically take it all with you. There are no item boxes to deposit and retrieve items from, although you can sell anything to the merchant and repurchase it from him later, but this does not function much like those item boxes. And there are no ink ribbons in the game, meaning you can save at typewriters however many times you want, eliminating another source of tension and resource management. Plus, the game provides free opportunities to save after every chapter and plentiful amounts of checkpoints. As decently fun as the weapons, ammo, and healing items inventory is to organize like a puzzle minigame, that someone has actually made into its own puzzle game, truly there is something cathartic about organizing this inventory. Never having to compromise taking key items against weapons, ammo, or healing items destroys the whole point of inventory management, making it less challenging, much less compelling gameplay. This is the reason I would rather play any of the original trilogy games over this one. I'm sorry, guys, but maybe a game is too one-dimensional when a guy who had just barely been born when those early games came out can find them more fun than this one. A minor point for me I almost forgot to include, but knew I needed to or the comments will scathe me for failing to mention, is the robust upgrade progression system lots of people praise as one of the game's best features. In short, it's good. I do, however, prefer the old way of upgrading weapons in survival horror games where you collect upgrade parts through optional key item puzzles every time you play the game, adding a strategic tension to whether it's worth it or not to go out of your way to get them, or just make do with the base models. So now, let me state why I may love certain elements present here in RE4 in other games, but these disparate elements combined here in this game simply do not work. I can hear you now. Mitch, clearly this is a very different type of game from the rest of the series. Stop comparing it to the other games and give it a fair shake. You know, that is totally fair. I hear you, and I agree. Now that we have the context of this game being unlike the other games in this franchise that I so dearly love, I still do not think this game works on its own terms. Since RE4 really isn't a survival horror game, does it still work as a horror game? No. No, I definitely do not think so. For context, I need to talk about the grandfather of all horror games, Castlevania. That may surprise people, but the classic Konami franchise was originally conceived as a video game version of a classic horror film, more Dracula or Frankenstein than 80s slasher films or George Romero zombie films. Since the series began on the highly limited Famicom or NES, the animation and sound were severely limited, meaning the way Konami created horror and tension in those games came through the gameplay itself, rather than creepy visuals or eerie music. For simplicity and brevity's sake, the way they did it was threefold. 1. Limited but learnable movement. 2. Precision-based and deliberate combat. And 3. Enemies that can mess you up quickly unless you are cautious or know what you're doing. In classic Castlevania, there tends to be very little movement options available to the Belmonts. The jump is immediate like other platformers of the era, but once you commit to a jump, you are so committed that you and the jump are married and have 3 kids. If you realize you are going down a pit, you will go down that pit. Nothing to be done. The same goes for the whip. There is a delay to the attack of the famous vampire killer, where the Belmont will pull back as you press the button, and then a few seconds later it will whip forward to destroy any undead or monsters in its path. You can't speed this action up or cancel the attack either. You must learn the delay and master the use of the whip, along with the other limited use sub-weapons. Finally, the precision-based platforming, limited healing, and plenty of instant death pits in the classic Castlevania games makes dying in them extremely easy if you are not careful. It could be a rogue Medusa head or ravenous crow that stuns you until death do you part from your knockback animation. And your patience! Easily the most annoying death in classic Castlevania. Classic Castlevania games are so thoroughly fun and difficult because if you can overcome the tension, you will truly feel like an unstoppable vampire killer. These early lessons do apply to modern horror games. Think Amnesia, Alien Isolation, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Silent Hill. Limited mobility, limited ability to attack and defend, and almost every enemy can be absolutely devastating. Let's look at the 2 things that make me think that RE4 is not a compelling horror game. The robust combat and often lame enemies. Leon has a bevy of combat abilities in this game. Access to numerous guns, an incredibly useful knife, and WWE wrestling and MMA finishing moves. This combined with enemies that go down surprisingly easy, shooting a Ganado almost anywhere stuns them, and then shoot them a few more times and they are on the ground. Repeat a time or 2 and that's it, they're dead. When I see a zombie in a classic RE game, or any enemy in any RE game that released after 7, I may not necessarily be scared of them anymore, but the tension is always there of, I need to be careful. When I see a Ganado, I shrug. Partially because these enemies may technically be infected with a mind control virus, but functionally they are stupidly slow humans with weapons bent on killing you as they needlessly slumber towards you, rather than infected monsters. Like the other games, where zombies, the mold, and other bioweapons actually feel like real monsters rather than dumb humans that speak a foreign language and are basically like human enemies in other games. Instead of a single enemy in RE4 filling me with dread, most of the time the game overwhelms you with dozens of them at once. In most cases, combat is about juggling the amount of enemies in a frantic bid to use that vast amount of abilities Leon has, and that is what we call an action game. But RE4 also fails as an action game for me. Contrary to a horror game, action games tend to give a variety of movement and combat options, and their enemies tend to be easily dispatchable and get the player with overwhelming numbers rather than a few who can easily end the player. Additionally, combos tends to be the defining features of the best action games. Think melee combat systems like Bayonetta, Hades, Batman Arkham games, or similar ones like Insomniac's Spider-Man universe or the Middle-earth games. If I admire the robust combat system of RE4, I do admit it's the best part of the game, why does the game fail as an action game for me? Simple. The clunky movement of Leon and the few times that movement and combat system genuinely do provide solid tension in the game. I have never had any problem with tank controls, once I got the hang of them, in classic RE and survival horror games, mostly because it adds to the tension and horror of those games, and because the game's focused more on strategic movement and inventory management and exploration, rather than combat or fast-paced movement. Tank controls work in classic survival horror because you can move your character based on their perspective rather than the ever-shifting perspective of the fixed camera angles of those games. But the modern controls are certainly very game-breaking and fun. Even the remakes of RE2 and 3 feel less clunky to control, yet those still limited movement options contribute to the rest of the game, focusing on delivering tension-filled horror and inventory and resource-based combat. I have full 360-degree movement, yes, but I can't jump or move very fast. Why, if RE4 is an action game, does Leon feel brutal to control? I should mention here that I played RE4 on the PS4 as opposed to the GameCube. The reason this is important is that the GameCube controller's analog stick has notches and is therefore more suited to tank controls than the DualShock's 360-degree analog stick. So, in order to move and run with Leon in RE4 with tank controls, I fell back to the way I played fixed camera RE games with a DualShock controller, using the D-pad. The problem there is that once I go into aim mode, using the D-pad is incredibly clunky to aim, so I would use the analog stick. So imagine how clunky it feels to play a game where moving the character and aiming weapons are done with two totally different control schemes, and the combat is reliant on constant juggling of adjusting your position and firing your weapons. However, I do admit this is not the original intended control scheme, and proves why sometimes simple ports of older games are more complicated than they might appear at first glance. Additionally, transitioning between movement, using the knife, or pulling out a gun feels frustratingly slow and segmented. Not to mention, I have to go into the inventory system just to change what gun I am using. Modern RE games allow you to assign a few weapons to the D-pad so you can eliminate a lot of this menuing to change weapons quickly, and that makes the combat flow way better. Why does the transitions between various combat capabilities feel so darn chunky? The one exception to this are the finishing moves, where a single-timed contextual button press triggers an admittedly cool-looking but mechanically shallow combat maneuver. It's basically an optional QuickTime event. Why, if RE4 is an action game, let alone a dumb, fun, cheesy action game, are there so many brutal death animations that can occur immediately after Leon slings a dozen quips in a cutscene, especially when there are enemies that can kill you in one hit? If it is supposed to be a dumb action game, I should feel ready to take names and wreck these guys, not nervous semi-panic. But since I had a mixture of both, these enemies don't induce either horror or trigger my inner Rambo. So that is my biggest problem with the game. Point to RE4 as being either a horror or action game, and I can provide counters that are incongruous for me to reconcile. Call it a horror game? Why is Leon a WWE or MMA performer? Why is gunplay so darn effective? Why do we have basic enemies, often goofily holding up axes, or firecrackers, or pitchforks, slowly moving forward while I mow them down or knife them to death with little resistance? Why can I not take the plot or most of the characters seriously, lowering whatever stakes may exist inherently in the premise? Call it a mindless action game? Why regenerators? Why one-hit kill chainsaw enemies? Why tank controls? Why the terrifyingly effective sound design? Many of the noises the enemies make are excellently tension-filled and can make my skin crawl or surprise me on occasion here. So why is the game so easy? I admit here I may have enough experience gaming, but by the time I got to RE4, I was already well experienced, so much so that most of the tension you feel and skill you learn early on is lost on me because I already moved past it. With few exceptions, I rarely died, and those deaths usually felt like they came about because I was so bored that I turned my brain off and got excessively careless, rather than because the game presented me with a gripping challenge. Even on professional, it felt very easy for me, with the exception of maybe the trench sequence on the island and one or two other sections. Also, the main campaign is way too long, of doing basically the same thing over and over again. Shoot some enemies, knife them, maybe do a suplex or roundhouse kick, rinse and repeat, do some very basic item collecting and puzzle solving that is absolutely nothing to write home about, and occasionally escort and protect Ashley, which, guys, wasn't really that hard. But I do agree with everyone that Ashley as a character is fairly annoying. Guys, Resident Evil 4 has a basic first playthrough time that averages at 16 hours. That is ignoring any deaths or failures, whereas a playthrough for the remake of 1 can be dragged out to 16 hours by collecting every single item that you can possibly find. By the time Ada dropped me off at the island, I wish the game was already over. 60% of RE4 is combat I mastered almost from the word go, with maybe 15% of the game decently challenging but mostly annoying fights, and the rest is mindless puzzle solving, simple inventory management, and poorly aged QuickTime events. Quick sidebar. Why does almost everyone complain about lame QuickTime events in every other game but not this one? At least in Spider-Man, there are moments where the player has to rapidly tap the triggers on the controller, simulating Spider-Man using his web shooters. Even those are more interesting QuickTime events than a janky knife fight, numerous times for dodging during cutscenes, or better yet, button mashing so Leon can use his manly arms to slowly pull himself up from hanging on a ledge. Anyway, compare all that to almost every other RE game that either is a well-balanced survival horror game with combat, meaningful inventory management, and exploration-based puzzle solving, or is a game that mixes different gameplay sections well, and is usually half that gameplay time. RE4 is a middling action horror game hybrid with highly optimized combat I found simple and mostly easy, with little else to mix up the gameplay, aside from mildly fun but almost brainless inventory sorting. With a plot and characters I found too cheesy and often frustratingly annoying to take seriously, that I only sometimes laughed at or with, that takes way too long. The best way I can describe how I feel about this game is like watching The Shining, and once Johnny breaks through the door and is stomping down the hallway, suddenly John Cena peeks through the wall, says,
"Are you sure about that?"
and Kool-Aid Man's Johnny with a suplex while his theme song plays. Neither the horror nor goofy brainless action of this sequence are bad. In fact, I think many of these elements are quite good in a vacuum, but they are so tonally dissonant that I never fully subscribed to either. That, plus my experienced gamer skills, made the game feel a little dull and too easy for how long and repetitive the game is. Look, my goal here has never been to change the consensus of people out there who worship RE4 as some kind of holy text of video games. I just grew tired of hearing everyone talk about it like it's so obvious that it's the best game of all time and of the series. I know there are old school classic RE fans. They love their pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed cameras, and tank controls. And fans who love the action games and will never be caught dead playing the classic RE games. But in both camps, there are people who love RE4 and or declare it the greatest RE game and or video game of all time. To the fans who love classic RE and RE4, is RE4 even survival horror? Is it even scary? Is it even a fun action game? To the fans who love the later action installments that came out after 4 but before 7, first, I am assuming you are not a fan of horror, or at least survival horror, and second, that you'll never play them, at least partially because you felt tank controls were clunky in those older games. Well, why is RE4 an exception to this? Granted, these questions do simplify these games a little much. To be clear, despite my frustrations, I also enjoyed my time with RE4 for what it is. I was occasionally terrified of an ominous chainsaw or a regenerator, and chuckled at some of the cheesy jokes by the Dreamboat. If you disagree with any or all of my opinions here, I'm cool. I know plenty of people I think are cool who wouldn't agree with my opinion of RE4, and I still think they're pretty awesome. So, is RE4 a technically sound game? Yes. Did I enjoy RE4 and am glad I finally played the landmark gaming title? Yes. Do I prefer dozens of other games, including most other Resident Evil games? Yes. We just got confirmation of a remake of Resident Evil 4. Shinji Mikami, while not involved, suggested in an interview that he believed such a remake should have a reworked script, and I thoroughly agree. Just enough to keep the tension palpable and the stakes real so that the horror already here can have a greater impact. I don't hate cheese. Almost every RE game has some. It's just that most of them don't have the tension destroyed by the goofiness or absurdity of copious amounts of cheese, like I feel happens here in RE4. Additionally, Capcom, if my thoughts might prove useful from someone who wanted to love RE4 more than I did, please choose a tone for the game and build everything else around it. It looks like you want to lean more into the horror of the original version. I personally hope that if that's the case, add more survival horror elements like backtracking, more exploration fueled by puzzle solving, and less obviously linear level design generally. Get rid of tank controls, please. I say shorten the campaign, only to tighten the pace of this beefy game, not necessarily remove areas, just make them less drawn out in overly long corridor levels. Although I wouldn't mind the removal of the island personally, but at least make it shorter, please. Although the combat in this remake looks very action-heavy, leaning into it with smoother controls, the ability to switch weapons without opening up the inventory every time by using the D-pad like modern entries, and adding more options like the parry will lean into the action hero character of Leon in this game and improve the combat. The AI and enemy animations look more dynamic and hounding and make the Ganados feel more like the crazy mind-controlled cult they were intended to be, rather than the dopey generic enemies they felt like in the original. I hope a remake will turn this fun but overall middling and disappointing game for me into one of my favorite games like what it seems it is for the rest of the gaming community. But if I'm honest, I wish y'all remade Code Veronica, which desperately needs it more than RE4 honestly. Or make DLC for Resident Evil 3 Remake to add back more areas and help it fully live up to the original game. I have my fair share of both criticisms and defenses of RE3 Remake and its original, but that is a story for another day. I hope you all enjoyed my thorough analysis of my mixed feelings for Resident Evil 4, and hopefully can understand and respect it. Please don't skewer and roast me too hard, internet. My name is Mitch, and thank you for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Since you made it to the end, I hope I was able to earn your subscription to this channel, and please share your thoughts in the comments down below. I am currently doing a survey whose results I may analyze in a future video on what the Resident Evil fans want next for the franchise. I will post the link to the survey in a pinned comment on this video. I hope to see you next time, right here on Mitch's Tale.